welcome to the BNLSI Business and Economics series. My name is Andreas Wasmuht and I'm its convener. Today's topic is managing people in challenging times, and I'm delighted to have Professor Juani Swart with us, the Professor of Human Capital at the University of Bath, to discuss this very important topic. Welcome, Swani.
Very much for having me, and I'm so looking forward to speaking to you in these challenging times, because I think the very notion of employment is clearly challenged, but yet our work and how we deal with our work is very central to our identity. So I'm very, very grateful to have been invited to talk to you today.
Excellent. Before we get into the topic, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you actually do at the University of Bath in terms of human capital.
Sure. So basically, I started my academic career in psychology. So I'm a cognitive psychologist, and I did a very long 8-year study in South Africa. And I registered with the Medical and Dental Council, and then came, thankfully, through the Commonwealth Scholarship to the United Kingdom. And I studied my PhD in basically looking at self-awareness and tacit knowledge, and which was very, very enlightening. And then I started my career at Bath after that. And basically, I teach in knowledge management, strategic human resource management, which is very much linked to the topic today. And until recently, I was the Associate Dean of Faculty. And I was also, prior to that, the head of division of strategy and organization division. And I was also the MBA director. So I've had lots of management roles, which gave me insight into the issues that I speak about. But my research is mainly based around human capital and working across boundaries.
Excellent. Well, that's a huge amount of multidisciplinary knowledge, which is great. Well, I think I'm saying that because that's really relevant. I mean, too many disciplines nowadays are sort of specializing and are not really tackling these issues like people management from a holistic perspective. So I think I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, and maybe we can start about talking about the idea of how we manage people across organizational boundaries, because clearly in the current environment, and technology might help this, but it's still very complex because it's within and between and organizations that this sort of management needs to take place.
Yeah, I think that's a really. I mean, you've raised at least 3 important points there, as you would. So I think one of the first things that you raised there is that we need to work across boundaries. So if we take, I just read 2 days ago how the University of Bath has managed to design and produce kind of barriers, like masks for people working in the NHS, and that could only happen if we work across boundaries. So I think what's really important in knowledge intensive firms and in the environment we're currently working is that we can't work in silos. We can't only focus on our own discipline. We need to think about, how do we produce something? What medical knowledge do we have? How do we work with our suppliers? So we have to continually work across these boundaries. So innovation needs to take place, not within our silo, but between different disciplines. So I think that is first and foremost the most important thing. So it's innovation across boundaries. That's the first thing. And then the second of that is, if we think that we are going to work in this way, then we need to think about, well, how do we manage people in this way, right? So the kind of antiquated way of managing people would be that we think about managing people within a boundary. So I recruit someone, I appraise them, I reward someone in my silo, in this kind of current state of being. But in the way that we're working very much in the current situation and in the future of innovation, we need to think that we can't employ and reward and manage people in that way. Everything that we do will happen in a networked way. So we need to think about how we manage knowledge in a networked way, how we innovate in a networked way. So it's not about your learning and my learning, it's about our learning together across the network. So if that happens, then how do we resource this talent? How do we recruit this talent? How do we continue to develop this talent? Because obviously the network will continue to evolve. So if you think about the current state that we're in with COVID-19, there would be an evolution of the situation, and therefore our development of talent and how we support the current situation will continue. So it's not about within boundaries, it's about across boundaries, and how we continually generate talent across these boundaries, and then also how our human resource practices and our talent management practices extend across these boundaries. And in the very short summary that you gave at the start, it is the notion that the management of people will become increasingly dispersed. So rather than our previous thinking that it's within an organization and within tight boundaries, it disperses across organizational boundaries. And I think that's the exciting thing. It's thinking about, how do we make this vibrant? How do we make people feel committed in this situation? Also, how do we continue to safeguard, the employee rights? So there's a very interesting tension in this situation. Sorry, so I've said a lot.
No, that's very good. I mean, I in my former life, I used to be a business consultant, and I worked with companies. I sort of see lots of organizations, even within one organization, being quite competitive between departments. Although obviously departments are supposed to be working within a process to achieve something. And I found even within an organization, it's very competitive. And then obviously between organizations, it becomes even more competitive. And people want to protect their own human capital, so to speak. How do we move forward from a sort of landscape of competition, internal and external, to one that is far more collaborative?
So I think that's very interesting. So I think the phrase to think about is co-opetition. So it's like the cooperation and competition at the same time. So if we think about, big integrated project teams. So, for example, Terminal 5 or cross channel, or big projects. So, in that situation, which is increasingly the way that work is happening, it's not about competition, but it is about human capital working together across different organizations, saying, well, if we are giving our human capital to a project team, how would that project team then compete internationally? So it's saying moving beyond the organizational boundaries, beyond the individual boundaries, even to be able to integrate knowledge and skills. Now, I think very importantly in the situation we are living in currently, if we are going to survive in a medical crisis, can't say, I know what ventilation means, and you know what blood pressure means, and what respiratory disease means. We need to come together and work across those boundaries for a network condition. So I think we're being forced at the moment to think about very, very important cross-boundary issues for survival. But if we take that down several levels in the economy, we can only survive internationally if we think about global projects, global objectives. So therefore, competition fades away. And the only way that fades away is if we think about how human capital is fused in a project level to be able to achieve international goals. So, as a professor of human capital, I would see that knowledge becomes deconstructed and then reconstructed at a project and international level to achieve good for, I suppose, human nature, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in terms of that sort of way of working, do you see that happening across countries or across organizations already? Are we moving in that direction of being more networked, more interacting, more sort of feeding back ideas from which innovation arises?
I see that all the time. So I have a very interesting research project at the moment, which is on project network organizations. And so I've worked with the United Nations, with the World Bank, and currently working with the Disasters Emergency Committee, DEC, who's happy for me to use their name. So obviously, when we look at those conditions, we are obviously working on a global scale. We're working across organizations, often called collectives or committees. And in that situation, we are drawing, often in a very short space of time, such as we are facing currently, on human capital across organizations. So I think the notion of working as a collective becomes very normal for individuals, and I'm always amazed at how people are non-competitive. So I went into this research thinking I probably won't see anything that I want to find, because I thought, individuals and organization would go, this is my knowledge, this is my information, I'm going to keep it for myself. But what we see in reality, if the conditions, and I think this is very important, the enabling conditions, so there's trust, good leadership, the culture of the different organizations, support, collaboration. If those things are in place, then we see fantastic innovation across boundaries, and the management of people in these situations become almost normal. It feels very, you don't need a lot of control. So yeah.
And do you see many differences at the generational level in terms of the level of collaboration, or does that cut across all different age groups?
That's a very good question. So what I have seen is I would have thought that I would find quite big differences, but I don't see that. So I think the kind of younger generations are obviously pushing for collaboration a lot more, and they are much more open to collaborate. But then the old generations in the organizations that I study are very in crisis situations, and in situations where we need to innovate, they are very open to collaboration. So I see. I suppose the way I would put it is like a push and pull. Right. So it's like a push from a younger generation and a pull from the old generation. So I see quite open knowledge sharing, quite open collaboration, and I suppose it's clearer across organizational boundaries rather than within organizational boundaries. That's what I see.
I'm putting my Germanic hat on now. All of this sort of creativity and collaboration obviously needs to take place within a certain framework. So people management systems must also be really important to properly harness all this collaboration and creativity. Do you have particular views on people management systems?
Yeah, I do. I do. Obviously, that's my field of speciality. So, so I think people management systems needed to move on a lot from within organizational boundaries to across organizational boundaries. So if you open any kind of people management handbook or textbook, it would talk very much about managing people within an organization. So the kind of traditional recruiting people, training people, paying them, and then finally getting rid of them. uh, but I think what is fascinating in the cross-boundary world is that people management systems are not owned by a single organization. So it is very much the strategic control of organizations are very much challenged. So we move into a reality where if we think about people management at the network level, so right. It's about resourcing individuals across a network and then developing talent across that network. But that is it sounds simple when you say it, but it is very challenging in reality because there's still individual pockets of organizations wanting to develop and reward individual people, but that needs to be amalgamated across the network. So it's saying, how do we develop talent for the best of the network? How do we reward for the best of the network? So yeah, I have very strong views about that, and that is obviously where the world is moving towards. And the basic mechanisms are set up for that, but it is still, I think it's still challenging for organizations to kind of reach that objective.
And how do people have sort of a common ways of working? Because obviously, once you manage across borders and boundaries of different organizations, they may use completely different tools, different types of systems, etc. Then how do you create some sort of common language and common way of doing things?
Very good question. So I think the sort of point of doing that is to focus on what you're achieving. So where we used to have organizational goals, we are more moving towards project goals, and in the current situation towards crisis goals. So if I am painting my wall just because I like to paint it, I'm just looking at my wall, so that's what I'm saying. Then that's quite easy. But if there was a flood or a major crisis, then the whole focus shifts. So the tempo of working shifts, how we work, what we work towards shifts. So creating a common language and a shared language easily shifts from within an organization to across organizations because of the focus of what we are trying to achieve. And I think obviously now it's a crisis, but in general, innovation goals could also be a focus. So we may try to, find a new cure for a certain illness, etc., or we are building a new aircraft or, whatever our major project objective is. So the shared language shifts from within organizations to across organizations. So I think the shared way of working is quite an easy shift if the goals are shifted.
Yes.
And once that happens, which I think is in some ways natural within the individual, but also driven by the organizations that are partaking in the network, then we can move forward. And then that is what dictates how people are managed. So it moves, so it's moving rather from basic people management structures towards the project objective that then drives the individual performance management practices. So I think it becomes more, how can we be more efficient and more effective at harnessing talent and human capital towards a project objective?
Okay, well, that makes a great deal of sense. So, I mean, I think it's the innovation and the collaboration from which working practices arise, rather than working practices defining from the outset what actually can be achieved. That makes a lot of sense. In terms of obviously we're sitting here doing this chat by Skype for obvious reasons, because you are scheduled to give a lecture at the BLSI tonight in front of real people sitting on real chairs, but obviously that's not possible at the moment. So to what extent do you think technology has a role to play to harness some of this collaboration and this project type of work?
So again, I think it's a very important point, and something that obviously in universities we are dealing with in real time, because we have final year students, several other students taking exams, needing to take lectures, and we have obviously at schools the same situation. So I've been teaching a knowledge leadership in a global economy module to MBA students for 21 years now. And in that, I obviously started when I was 5.
Yeah, of course.
But in that, I always spend a day on talking about technology in a 5-day week. And, I think that technology, sometimes knowledge management is seen as the solution to knowledge management. And I think we should not think about it in that way. And as you and I are experiencing right now, technology is a fantastic enabler. So I think when we talk about practices at the upper level and then enablers at the bottom level. So for me, the first enabler is culture. So how are we able to connect? Because I've spoken to you earlier today, and we've had emails, so we've established a little mini culture.
Yeah.
And then we have other enablers, of which technology is one. But without technology, it would be impossible. So I am completely thankful to technology, but I feel that technology is a foundation that helps us exchange knowledge, create new knowledge, create innovation. So I think we need to, if we think about the future of ambidexterity, so being explorative and exploitive, we need to embrace technology and say, how can it refine what we are doing, and how can it help us do things better? So I've been on an amazing technological journey in the last 3 weeks, just because we've had to collaborate so much more in technology. So I think we cannot ignore it, but it should not be our master, because our innovation supersedes technology. But it is such an important enabler for us to be able to do what we're doing currently.
Yeah, so you see technology as an important tool, but no more than that, to actually help us become more effective in the way we manage people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. It is a fundamental tool, and let's not underestimate the fundamentality of it. It's fundamental, but it cannot do everything we need to do. So it's a fundamental tool.
Yeah, it's quite interesting in terms of across time scales, so around time zones, where you can have various collaborative project teams doing something in one time zone, taking it to a certain place, and then another team virtually takes on the project to its next phase, and then at some point you have 24/7 coverage, and then the teams get together to sort of review the creation as a whole.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think something important to say is I obviously I'm collaborating in international research projects at the moment, and technology is so important in that. But I think something you and I touched upon briefly before is artificial intelligence. And I think what is important to think about and to understand is that with technology, our knowledge boundaries are redrawn. So we need to think about what is it that we absolutely need to know and need to enact and create, and what can technology do for us. So I think we need to have a blank sheet of paper and draw our own boundaries and say, what is it that I do and what can technology do?
Yeah.
Because that has shifted. when I look at just individuals that I speak to, they often they're sort of still situated within the previous world, and we just need to say, let's just like wipe out the boundaries and think about what it is that we can do. And that's why human capital is so important, because human capital shifts. Human capital needs to create the future. We need to create where we are going, how we find solutions, how we find medical solutions, how we find that across boundaries, and how we manage that human capital in a new world. Therefore, technology can take up some of the boundaries that we held in the past. And we need to think about where these boundaries are shaping and shifting in the future. So it's a very exciting world, and it's unknown, but we do need to redraw those boundaries in the face of technology.
Yes, and lots of philosophical and ethical issues that are associated with all this.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. We deal with them all the time.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, and so let's go to the sort of final stretch of this, because obviously we've talked about things like organizational boundaries, we talked about people management systems, we talked a little about technology and AI, but obviously all of this needs to take place in practice, in the real world. And I know you're heavily involved in actually sort of seeing this in the real world, and maybe you can give us a bit of an insight in terms of how this all comes together in practice.
Sure. I think the most important is that, so obviously the purpose of our conversation is people management in this new world. And in the real world, from the case studies that I've conducted, I see a major shift. So for me, it's the three C's. It's context and content and collaboration. So basically, we need to think about how we manage people. So the context of what we're doing is shifted from the organization to the network. It's moving towards a consistency. So in the past, you may have competitors working together with different employment practices, but that cannot exist any longer, because if I'm working alongside you and we are working on new medical technologies, then clearly I will know which HR practices you have in place, and mine may be different. So therefore, we need to have some consistency. So therefore, the kind of the ethical issues around that is really important. And then finally, collaboration. So if you are an HR director in organization A, I'm an HR director in organization B, we have to think about how do we merge what we do. So it's no longer, in the human capital world, it would be developing firm-specific human capital so I can compete against you. That no longer exists. It's about how are we going to fuse the best knowledge and brains and skills so we can really move this technology forward and this project forward. So it's super exciting, but it means that we are going to collaborate. We're not going to pull apart and compete. So it's a real shift in practical terms in terms of what we're going to do. So it's super exciting. And I think in some ways people are already doing it, but it's like it's also a different paradigm. It's a different way of thinking.
Well, I certainly very much enjoyed collaborating with you today.
And I loved it too.
That's been really helpful. And to our viewers, I just would like to say that if you enjoyed this particular chat, then please visit the BRLSI website on brlsi.org to see more of these kind of chats across a whole genre of different topics. Anything from antiquity to world affairs, you can view on that website. So once again, it's www.brlsi.org, and I wish you happy viewing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.